Have you had a recent interview and you're wondering if you just got asked something inappropriate? Well, stick around because in this video, I'm going to share with you 12 common illegal questions and also how to answer them. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk to you about illegal questions in the interviewing process. If you've gone through any level of interviewing, chances are you've probably been asked an illegal question or two along the way. Now, as a corporate recruiter with over 20 years of experience interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's biggest and most well-known companies, I do know a thing or two about interviewing, and in particular interview questions that we can't ask you. So in a lot of cases where you're asked an illegal question, I don't necessarily think that it's because of a malicious intent. It's likely more a case of an unskilled interviewer. However, that doesn't excuse the fact that it's an illegal question and shouldn't be asked. And if you're asked one of these illegal questions in an interview setting, I'm going to give you an idea of how you should best approach it and respond to the interviewer in a craftful way that isn't going to put you on the spot or immediately end the interview. However, there are probably some cases where if you're seeing a continual pattern of behavior from the interviewing team, you might actually want to consider cutting bait. I made a video about warning signs that you might be interviewing for a poor quality employer. I'll leave a link for that. But before we get too far into it, if you are interested in more videos from a recruiter on how to land your dream job, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Also, I am curious to hear if you've experienced any of these illegal questions in an interview. Let me know in the comments below. All right, so let's get into the questions. The first illegal question that you might experience in an interview, and it's fairly common, is the question around family planning. So if an interviewer asks you, do you have a family or are you planning to have a family? That is an illegal question. And why is it an illegal question? The main reason is that it has nothing to do with your job. Now, some people have argued that, well, it actually does have something to do with your job. That if you're having a family and you're going to be out of work, the rest of the organization is going to impact, and that they should have the right to know if you're planning to have a family. However, it doesn't work that way. There are laws against being able to ask that question, and it's illegal because it unfairly targets women in the workplace. Because the interviewer might make an unfair assumption that you're not dedicated to your work and that you're likely not going to come back after the baby comes. If you're asked this in an interview setting, you need to push back on the interviewer immediately and say you're dedicated to the position at hand and that you have every intention to be the best possible employee you can be. Now, the second major question is kind of related to the first one, but it takes it a step further. It actually asks about your current family situation. Tell me about your family, or tell me about your background. Now, the reason why this one is illegal as well is because it can indicate a lot of different protected classes, what your race, your color, your ethnicity, your country of origin, your religion potentially. None of those things should have any bearing on your ability to do the job and do it effectively. So if you're asked that question in an interview, you can say, I would prefer to keep the topic at hand of how I can add value to your company. I'm not sure how my family background relates to that. Now, the next illegal question is, if you have a disability. Now, some people might say, hey, wait a minute, you actually asked that on a voluntary self-identification form. That's actually two totally different things. So I recommend that you check out the voluntary self-identification video that I recorded earlier. And the reason why asking about a disability is illegal is it's actually protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. An employer can't discriminate against an employee who may have a disability if there's a reasonable accommodation that can be made to do the job. So if you're asked this question in an interview and you need a reasonable accommodation, all you need to do is say, I can meet the requirements of this position with a reasonable accommodation. And don't worry, employers are required to make reasonable accommodation if you're qualified for the position. Your disability status cannot be used as a reason why you're rejected. All right, so the next question that you might experience commonly in the interview actually deals with ageism. I also made a video about that as well, so you should check that one out if you're dealing with ageism related questions. This one is, how much longer do you plan on working? Now, in an employer's mind, they're wondering if you have long-term commitment to a role, but that's completely inappropriate and they cannot ask that question because it's certainly an age-related question and your age should have no bearing on your ability to do the job. So if you're asked this in an interview, the best way to push back on the interviewer is to say that you're excited about this position and you prefer to focus on how you can contribute to the team. Next up, we have the national origin question, which is, are you a U.S. citizen or where were you born? If you're somebody that was born outside of the United States, this may actually be a fairly common illegal question that you might receive. Employers are not allowed to ask you that question because it can discriminate based on national origin. Instead, employers are supposed to ask you if you are legally allowed to work in the United States without sponsorship. Best way to push back in this situation, if you're asked this in an interview, is to say, I'm actually legally able to work in the United States without sponsorship. Or you're able to work in the United States, but you require sponsorship, depending on your circumstance. However, know in the back of your mind that that's actually an illegal question and they really shouldn't be asking you that. The next type of question that you might find yourself being asked in an interview that would be considered illegal is if you've had any recent health issues. Anytime an interviewer dabbles in questions around health or health-related issues, you start to walk a real fine line between HIPAA laws and also the Americans with Disabilities Act. So employers are not able to ask you about the status of your health situation or potential disabilities, and you're going to answer it the same way as before. I'm able to meet the requirements of the position with or without reasonable accommodation. Same goes for the next question that you might be asked. Have you ever been injured in the workplace? Which is essentially the same exact thing. Employers may be fishing for whether or not you'd be a workers' comp liability. Maybe you got hurt in a previous position and you're working in an industrial type of setting and they don't want to take on the liability. But the good news for you is that it's actually illegal. They can't ask you that question, and you should respond the same way as the previous question. Now, what if you're asked about if you have an arrest record? Being asked if you've had an arrest record is actually an illegal question because an arrest is not a conviction. You actually can't be asked any of these types of questions unless you've given us authorization to conduct a background check post-offer. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule. Say, for example, you're convicted of money laundering, a felony, and you're applying for a position in a financial department in a major corporation. Now, that's probably something pretty relevant to that group. They might have a reason to ask you that question if it's related directly to the role. If you're asked about any recent arrests in an interview setting, the best way to push back is to say this: there is nothing in my past that would prevent me from performing this job effectively. So the next one might be asking questions around scheduling. So if an employer asks you if you are eligible to work on Sundays, that actually is an illegal question. And you might say, how's that an illegal question? Because there are certain times of the day and even certain times of the week where a candidate may have to observe some religious tradition. Instead, an employer should frame the question like this: this position requires occasional night and weekend shift work. Are you able to meet that requirement? So if you are asked that question in an interview, the best way to respond to it is, I am able to meet the requirements of the position. Now, the next illegal question is around age. An employer cannot come out and directly ask you how old you are. In addition, they shouldn't be asking you what year you graduated. Now, this one is a very slippery slope and it's probably pretty common. I actually talk about this in my ageism video, so make sure you check that out if you want more information. But if you're asked about how old you are, or the more subtle version of what years did you graduate, the best way to answer that is, my skills are cutting edge, so the date of graduation shouldn't have an impact on my performance in this job. Now, the next one's a really common one. It's asking about your most recent salary. Now, in the United States, a lot of the states have actually come out with legislation that you cannot ask those specific questions about previous comp in an interview setting. The idea being that if you've been unfortunate enough to work for a low quality employer who paid you below market value, that you shouldn't carry that with you like a scarlet letter across the rest of your career. Companies should be really focused on paying market value for what skills you bring to the table versus their internal equity. Your previous compensation should have no factor in what you should be earning going forward. But if you're asked that question in an interview, make sure you check out my video on how to answer the salary expectation question, but we want to put it back on the interviewer. Essentially, how you want to answer this is by saying something to the effect of, I'm more interested in speaking about my salary expectations going forward. And then it's up to you how you want to continue to answer that question. Again, I would refer to my salary expectation video if you want more information on that one. All right, so the final fairly common illegal question that you might experience is if you have a military background. If you were discharged from the military, you actually cannot be asked that in an interview question. Because again, it goes back to the background checks. We can't ask you questions that would be checked in a background. So if you're asked that question, you can answer it the same way we did with the arrest question. So there's nothing in my past that would prevent me from performing this position effectively. All right, so that's a lot of information to throw at you. There's a lot more legal questions out there that you potentially could get asked, but from a very high level, just wanted to give you a little bit more insight as to what you should be looking for when you're interviewing. Now, I am not a labor attorney, so none of this information should be construed as legal advice. If you feel like you have been subject to any one of these illegal questions and it has impacted directly your ability to get a job, I recommend that you reach out to a local labor attorney in your area to seek further guidance. But if you need more help trying to land your dream job, that actually is something that I specialize in. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com. It's loaded with insider tips on how to land your dream job. I also share some of my most powerful insider information inside of some training courses that I developed. So make sure you check out my website for more information on those as well. I know it's a lot of information. I really appreciate you sticking around this long. If you found value in this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. That actually helps other people find the information that they're looking for. I truly do appreciate you stopping by, and we will see you on the next one.